today's reading is an excerpt from Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail. More basically, I'm in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their villages and carried their "Thus said the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left his village of Taurus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so am I compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my own hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid. Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow provincial outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. You deplore the demonstrations taking place in Birmingham, but your statement, I'm sorry to say, fails to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought the demonstrations. I'm sure that none of you would want to rest content with a superficial kind of social analysis that deals merely with the effects and does not grapple with the underlying causes. It's unfortunate that demonstrations are taking place in Birmingham. But it's even more unfortunate that the city's white power structure left the Negro community with no alternative. In any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps: collection of the facts to determine whether injustice exists, negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. We've gone through all these steps in Birmingham. There can be no gainsaying the fact that racial injustice engulfs this community. Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Its ugly record of brutality is widely known. Negroes have experienced grossly unjust treatment in the courts. There have been more unsolved bombings of Negro homes and churches in Birmingham than in any other city in the nation. These are the hard, brutal facts of the case. On the basis of these conditions, Negro leaders sought to negotiate with the city fathers, but the latter consistently refused to engage in good faith negotiation. I invite you now to stand as you're willing and able and join in singing number 118 in the Gray Books, "This Little Light of Mine."
I'm gonna let it shine, this little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, this little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine.
Our speaker this morning, Ryan Conley, comes again to us from the Valley Unitarian Universalist congregation in Chandler. He grew up in northern Nevada and moved to the Valley in 2006. He graduated from University of Nevada, Reno, and was a school teacher for a short time in Reno before moving to the Valley to work for U.S. Airways. He currently is very active in the congregation in Chandler, including recently serving on the search committee that found their new minister, Reverend Andy Burnett. Ryan's active on the worship council of his congregation and got the bug of preaching when he was in Reno attending Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Northern Nevada. Ryan wants to continue his hobby of preaching and maybe in the near future start attending seminary so he can make his hobby into a future career. Welcome, Ryan.
I guess I don't need the step. And thank you, Joe, for not playing air cello, as you mentioned. That was beautiful. I must give credit for this sermon to my good friend, the Reverend Gregory Stewart, who served as my minister in Reno, where I live, for helping me to be inspired to write this sermon. So when I flip through the various pages of the Hebrew Bible, also known as the Old Testament, there is one book that I gladly call my favorite, the book of Esther. Perhaps it's because it's not very long. It's only 3 pages and contains only 10 short chapters, so it's an easy read for anybody and can be read in a single sitting. Perhaps it's because it's the book prior to the book of Job, which I find deeply appalling. Perhaps more likely the case, it features not only one, but 2 women, which take it upon themselves to stick it to the man, despite the male-dominated culture that and likely risk to their lives. Perhaps it is because God, the self-pontificating egomaniac, the main character of every other book of the Bible, the ultimate drama queen himself, is suddenly absent from Esther's pages. Not even a word mentioning, not even a mention of God can be found anywhere in its text. Because of the many reasons which draw me to the book of Esther, many historical biblical scholars seem to have issues with it. It doesn't fit well with the theme of the Bible. No mention of God, too many presumptuous women, and the like. For those reasons, there continue to be strong movements to have it removed from the biblical canon altogether. It perhaps remains the most controversial book within the Bible. So if you have a Bible at home, I would suggest blowing the dust off the cover and spend a few moments to give Esther a read, as I feel it is well worth it, and I hope you too discover the gem within the rough. While I could actually read you the entire text of Esther within the time allotted for the sermon, I'll just give you a basic run-through. The story takes place in Persia during the time that the Jews were in exile in Persia, living under the king the Bible calls Ahasuerus. There isn't a named king in history with that name, but most scholars attribute this person to be Xerxes I, which reigned from 484 to 464 BCE. It takes place in the city of Sush, and again, we don't know where that is, but we think it might be Shushan, which is located in western Iran. The book begins when King Ahasuerus decides to celebrate his 3rd anniversary as king and throws the single biggest party, I think, yet ever in history. This party ended up lasting not 6 hours, not 6 days, not 6 weeks, but 6 months of continuous celebration, eating, and drinking. They sure knew how to party back then. But sadly, all good things have to come to an end, and one night, most likely in a drunken stupor, the king calls for his queen Vashti to come around in front of him and his chums and let them oogle after her. When the chamberlains came to get Vashti, she had the audacity to say no. "Oogle this," which obviously dampened the celebratory mood of the king. This presented a real challenge for the king, and he gathered many of his top advisors to discuss this Vashti problem. Well, the words directly from the Bible tell it best, that if, quote, "the women of the kingdom learn of Vashti's refusal to come when called upon, they will begin to despise their husbands, which will lead to excessive contempt and wrath," end quote. So it was decided that this Vashti be dethroned and tossed out, and a better behaved woman be found instead. After the king calms down from his hissy fit, his servants summon all the supple young virgins throughout the kingdom, and they were gathered from all the provinces of the kingdom, and to take place in what I can only describe as a very elaborate beauty contest to determine who shall replace Vashti. Among the beautiful, supple young virgins gathered up was Esther. Esther was orphaned and raised by her cousin Mordecai in the city of Shushan. When Esther went to the palace, Mordecai told her, "It may not be a good idea to mention you're Jewish." So after a year-long beautification process, Esther was finally brought before the king to be vetted, and ultimately she was selected to become the new queen. Mordecai would frequently sit at the palace gate to inquire about Esther and check up on her now and then. And during one evening, he overheard two enraged palace guards make a threat against the life of the king. He got word to Esther of this threat, who informed the king of the plot, and the two palace guys were executed as a result. Unless you watch VeggieTales, and they were sentenced to the land of perpetual tickles. In response to his security breach, the king called upon Haman, an Agagite, to take charge of what became the king's right-hand man. While it doesn't go into detail in the book of Esther, the fact that Haman is an Agagite is an amazingly important one. Agag was the king of the Amalekites, and providing a fine example of biblical morality. The Amalekites were the victims of a mass genocide by the Jews ordered by God himself in 1 Samuel chapter 15. So you may say that Haman might have a little bit of a grudge to bear. The king ordered all the people in the kingdom to bow before Haman. One man, however, did not, Mordecai the Jew. I guess you can say it's a Jewish thing. Their second commandment, or first, depending on who you ask, called them to bow before nobody except God. Well, Haman's ego knows no limit, and Mordecai's refusal to bow before him infuriated Haman. It's likely that Haman had the power to destroy Mordecai himself, but he saw an opportunity to use this situation to his advantage and go after all of the Jews. So he went to the king and likely plied him with a little bit of wine and mentioned to him that there are people within his kingdom who have their own laws. They ignore the laws of the king, and Haman quietly suggested that they should be destroyed. Apparently not giving it much thought, and likely in a drunken condition, the king simply turns over his signet ring to Haman and told to do with it as he wished. So Haman drafted an edict calling for the destruction of the Jews on a specific date that he apparently chose by drawing, and he signed the name of the king and then sealed the edict with the signet from the king's ring and sent it throughout the kingdom. Now, of course, when Mordecai heard of this edict, he became understandably distraught. Well, he apparently lost his mind. He teared off his clothing, dressed himself in rags, and sat out the gates of the city wailing uncontrollably. Haman decided to taunt Mordecai and build a 40-foot-high gallows, telling him that it was built just for him. When Esther heard of Mordecai's distress, she offered him clothes, which he refused, and he told her of the plot to destroy the Jews by Haman. So here is Esther, protected by the walls of the palace and serving as queen, and knowing that if she doesn't act, her family and people will be destroyed. But there is one problem. Nobody can come before the king without being summoned. And if you did, you run the risk of being executed. But after Mordecai's plea for help, She agrees, and in her words, "If I perish, I perish." So Esther approached the king's chamber, no doubt with a bit of apprehension, and she entered the room unannounced and uninvited. I imagine the room grew silent, expecting a raging tyrant of a king to order her execution, but instead he allowed her to speak. She said she'd like to ask him a favor, and he agreed, says, "Well, whatever you want, I'll give you." Well, it says, "Well, come to a banquet I'm going to prepare for you and Haman in the following evening." And the king agreed, and Esther was told that she would be granted any request she wanted. Later that evening, perhaps due to a brief moment of sobriety, the king realizes that Mordecai didn't get rewarded properly for providing the information which likely saved the king from an assassination. Haman came before the king to ask him permission to hang Mordecai. And the king asked him, "What shall be done for whom is favored by the king?" Haman naturally assumed the king was referring to himself, and so he went into this elaborate thing of being paraded in front of people, worshipped, kissed the ground upon, all that wonderful thing. So the king says, "Okay, great, do that for Mordecai tomorrow." So Haman had to do this for Mordecai, just utterly humiliated him. And then later that evening he got a knock on the door, and he was ordered back to the palace to attend the banquet that Esther had prepared. After the banquet was completed, the king asked, "Okay, what do you want?" And she came out as a Jew and begged for her life and in the lives of the people, and informed the king how Haman had plotted for their destruction. This, of course, infuriated the king. He ordered Haman to be hung from the gallows, and that he had constructed for Mordecai, and gave Mordecai Haman's job as second in command. It's funny how politics haven't changed over the years. But when Esther and Mordecai asked the king to reverse the edict calling for the destruction of the Jews, he said he couldn't. Rule number 1 in politics, apparently, is under no circumstances ever admit that you are wrong about anything, for by doing so it will appear that you're prone to mistakes and thus undermine your authority. So with his new authority given to him by the king, Mordecai instead drafts another edict, which, in yet another fine example of biblical morality, calls upon the Jews to destroy anyone who opposes them the day prior to what would have been their destruction. The Jewish festival of Purim celebrates the story of Esther and Mordecai, and it is a wild celebration, and because of its timing, it's often called the Jewish Mardi Gras, and it occurred this last week. And there was a wonderful, interesting story about that. Apparently there was an assemblyman in New York State that kind of got caught up in some type of scandal as a result of Purim. In a description of how to properly celebrate Purim, old ancient documents actually say that you have to become so intoxicated that you can no longer tell the difference between the phrases, "Cursed be Haman" and "Blessed be Mordecai." So there is the book of Esther, and I hope you read it and enjoy it as much as I do. As a Unitarian Universalist deist, I'm often asked why I'm even a member of a religion at all. Deism is itself a belief that does believe in God, but such a God pays no attention or is involved with the human affairs whatsoever. So if I don't need to worship God, nor do I believe that any ritual or prayer I can do can win favor of such a deity, why then be a member of any religion at all? I feel that such a question is asked of me by somebody who may not be fully understanding what a religion is all about. I feel that religion isn't about worship at all. It's about building a community. Religion, the word itself, has a Latin root, which basically means to bring together or bind together. It has nothing to do with about faith. It has in some deity or deities, and such religions who feel that their sole purpose is to lead its flock to God, I feel is missing the whole point. Human beings, like other life on earth, are a product of millions of years of evolution. Natural selection causes life to develop strategies that ensure our survival. Only the successful strategies allow for any given species to survive. And I believe the most successful strategies that we as human beings have developed is actually to develop religion. Through a communal effort, we have found ways of supporting massive populations and develop methods of survival which allow us to live in virtually every environment on Earth, and now even outside of Earth altogether. It appears that to most other animals, the most likely to survival technique is to be selfish. A pack of hungry hyenas will fight continuously over a fresh kill, trying to get as much food as possible, ensuring that they will ultimately survive. Humans have recognized that a better way is through sharing, and to have developing skills such as communication and empathy, which allows us to take care of each other, thus helped us to become perhaps the most wildly successful species on Earth. God help the Earth. The development of religion is hopefully designed to inspire us to rise above these innate tendencies and provide a clarity of reason and act in ways that benefit everyone. The book of Esther provides a unique view of the true purpose of religion. It is absent of any distracting deities, which may lead you to astray from the words of its truth, or the truth of its words. Esther instead builds a case of taking important risks to benefit the entire society. Risk-taking, it seems, to go against the very nature of our existence. Our drive of survival seems to be much more powerful, and thus our tendency is to be conservative. Our tendency is to remain status quo, to lie down, and to hide when confronted with danger. The nail that sticks out will be hammered down. A famous Japanese saying. Our unique religion calls us to be progressive and take risks that help everyone, not just a single person. This is not something that has escaped our historic Unitarian Universalist figures. Thomas Jefferson decided to cut out the miracles and the resurrection of Jesus from the Christian Bible because he believed that they were distracting from what the true message was, to call us to rise above our own animalistic and conservative tendencies and recognize the beauty within everyone. Eloquent words written by Unitarian Theodore Parker calls us to be a religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere, its temples all space, its shrine the good heart, its creed all truth, its ritual works of love, its profession of faith, divine living. Our faith's removal of any creeds and dogma and embrace the findings of scientific process is significant because we recognize that any unchanging and uncompromising ritual serves only to distract us, and the rigidity doesn't provide us a means for us to grow in knowledge and understanding. Such practices serve only to hammer us down. The beauty of Esther is its timelessness. I can see the story of Esther being played out again. I can see all the characters from its story within the events of the past several years. We have a king, but today the king is the public, who seems to be focused on things that only serve to enhance his personal enjoyment and care only about the issues that directly affect him. The king seems more interested in the life of Lindsay Lohan rather than anything that might actually have a profound and lasting impact on our society. The king has turned over his kingdom to Haman, the various politicians whose actions are likely driven because of specific agendas. We can identify the Jews in the form of the various groups of minorities who make easy targets for which Haman can easily convince the king, the public, of their treachery, by saying such things as, they're going to change our culture. They don't respect our laws. They don't speak our language. They make us uncomfortable. They go against the very nature of our beliefs and even want to change the time-honored institution of marriage. They want to take away your guns. We can identify Mordecai, represented by the organizations such as Puente and the Gay and Lesbian Education Network, who are calling out to Esther for help. And we have Esther. We are Esther. We have the duty to take the message to the king that Haman is up to no good and his intentions have the potential to cause harm to everyone. Perhaps the most influential words within Esther can be found in chapter 4, verses 13 and 14. And I ask you to listen carefully to the words of Mordecai as he's trying to convince Esther to go to the king to help stop the efforts of Haman. Quote, Mordecai says to Esther's servants to tell her, "Do you think in your heart that you will escape the king's palace any more than the rest of us? For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from some other place. Who is to say that you are not in this place within the kingdom for such a purpose as this?" End quote. Who is to say that we, Arizona Unitarian Universalists, are not in the place within our society for such a purpose as this? To make a difference. To step up and be heard, to speak for those who can't or are afraid to speak, to stand up against oppression and provide an example for real change. No doubt that we have come a long way, and perhaps at times it seems trivial, but our government's policies do cause pain, they do cause harm, and they continue to suppress minority groups and others. Why are we Esther? It is because we have the look of the idealistic America. Generally speaking, we are successful, well-educated, somewhat older and presumably wiser. We don't have the appearance of those we'd expect to see at a protest, and when we are there, we tend to get noticed. Everyone expects that the rallies against immigrants will draw immigrants and Hispanics from whom are being crying foul, but when we show up, something a tad bit more unexpected, people take notice. In my discussions and debriefing of the 29 Unitarian Universalist arrestees protesting in the July 29th rally in downtown Phoenix a few years ago, I learned that Haman Arpaio came down to the jail himself to personally see with his own eyes that his deputies were saying. He saw before him was something he did not expect. He saw us. And to his dismay, we looked very much like he did. We got the attention of Haman that day. Now we have to continue moving forward to take the message to the king, to let him know what's really going on. We have to step up our levels of participation in the events we're already planning to attend, and I've heard this already today during your Joys and Sorrows time, that we don't communicate well between our congregations in the valley. So we need to step that up and be more proactive in making that a better thing. Last year's participation, for instance, at the Phoenix Pride March was an example, was overwhelmingly positive for all the attendees, and let's set a goal of a massive group of UUs proudly walking and chanting down the parade route this year, which occurs in April. I'm not sure if your congregation is planning on doing anything. I know that my congregation is, and we would probably love to work with you to ensure that as many people show up as possible. I feel that our congregations can help fill also a really huge need that I've noticed recently with the strong effort to include an often overlooked minority, those around us who are suffering from various forms of mental or intellectual disabilities. The tragic recent mass shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, and the several others, including one in Tucson, may have taught us all an important lesson that there are many among us who have serious mental concerns, and the resources may not be available and may not be enough. I would like to see us reach out to this community and transform our sanctuaries into places where individuals with these conditions can feel welcome. It will take a great deal of patience. We have a lot to learn, and at times we may be very, very challenged and feel uncomfortable. But we need to reach out to this community if, at very least, we can provide some type of comfort for those who are truly suffering. Then there's nothing more Unitarian Universalist than that. Who is to say that we have not been placed within our kingdom, within our society, for such a time as this? Being Esther means taking risks. In the end, the task may be too overwhelming for us, but if we fail, we fail. We still must maintain our religious values, and when the call to serve is made, we must answer that call and come forward en masse and try our very hardest to make the difference in the lives of others. Blessed be and amen. We have a closing hymn, hymn number 1014, I believe. That's it, Standing on the Side of Love. You please all rise if you're willing and able. Promise of the Spirit, faith, hope, and love abide. So every soul is blessed and made whole. The truth in our hearts is our guide. We are standing on the side of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one. Emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim. We are standing on the side of love. Sometimes we build a barrier to keep love tightly bound. But by fear, unwilling to hear, denying the beauty we found. We are standing on the side of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one. Emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim. We are standing on the side of love. A bright new day is dawning, when love will not divide. Fractions of grace in every embrace, fulfilling the vision divine. We are standing on the side of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one. Emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim. We are standing on the side of love. We are standing on the side of love.
Please join me in reading of our West Valley UU Church's mission statement. It's found in your order of service. This church provides a safe place to celebrate diversity, draw inspiration for our lives, foster social and environmental justice, and compassionately support each other in our spiritual searches. Ryan has some closing words for us.
Let us love one another because love is from God. Whoever does not love God does not know God, for God is love. No one has ever seen God. If we love one another, God lives within all of us. God is love, and those who abide in love abide in God, and God abides in them. There is no fear in love, for perfect love casts out fear. Thank you.
So next week,